Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of the HR Leaders Podcast, the show where we explore the future of work with industry experts and HR executives of the world's leading global brands. Today we have a special episode for you guys. We promised you we're going to bring more workshops here to you live on LinkedIn, and today we have a pretty incredible speaker and presentation for you. So today we're joined by David Mulligan, who's a Chief People Officer for International Consumer Services and Global Travel Services at American Express. Welcome to the show, David. How are you?
I'm doing well, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Not too bad. Well, how are you holding up, first and foremost?
Yeah, no, good. I've got 2 young kids, and we're managing to keep them entertained, even though we can't really leave the house. And that's been going well. And I think things are going well with American Express as well. I think we feel like we've got our arms around sort of the safety and security of all our teams across the world, and that's a great place to be, just to keep everyone safe and secure in the short term.
Fantastic. You have to give me some tips then. I'm barely dealing with one child at the moment, let alone 2. I think that is the hardest part, is literally keeping them entertained throughout the entire day. I've got a new respect for the nursery workers now. I'm like, that's your full-time job. I don't think I'm cut out for that.
Yeah, they're definitely professionals at what they do. There's no doubt about it. It's we're lucky that I think you've got a bit of space to look after them, and they've got so much energy, they tend to make you look after them anyway. You can't leave them alone. That's the fun of it, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. I realize I'm starting to take more care of my health and fitness, because I need the energy to keep up with Robin at this. I'm still young. I don't know how I'm going to deal in 10, 20 years from now to keep up with Robin at this pace. So it's
I'm told it gets better.
Oh, okay. I trust you. How old are your little ones?
Oh, they're only like 3 and 1. So I'm relying on other people who keep telling me it does honestly get better once they start being able to read a book and be self-sufficient.
Oh, okay. So Robin's 1.5. So we're kind of in that similar thing where my wife and I, one of us has to be present at all times. And I think that's the biggest challenge, sort of juggling back and forth with work diaries and commitments as well. So it's interesting times. Has the business been affected, obviously, given the travel element to your organization?
Yeah, for sure. We've gone through a big process of talking to our customers about what it is they want to see from us during this period, and fortunately we've got the flexibility to say, maybe we can change the type of benefits that we offer with the card and services. So we've been thinking hard about that and already rolled out some changes to be more relevant to what people are looking for in this interim period. But we're still bullish and excited about what's going on with the travel industry, and we've got so many huge partners in the travel industry that we're working closely with them to make sure that when things turn around, we're ready to support them 100%.
Good to hear. Well, let's jump into the topic of today's session. We're going to be talking about driving M&A value through HR integration, how to get it right? Big challenge for everyone. Every CHRO I speak to on a daily basis is kind of there's always, especially the global brands, it seems like every day this is happening. It's an ongoing part of the role, right? And so any value you can add here, definitely going to be well received by everyone listening right now. So if you want to sort of share your screen, jump into the presentation, we can dive straight in.
All right, that sounds great.
This is a moment of truth.
Did the technology work? I think the answer is
yes.
You can tell me yes. Fantastic.
Yeah, we can see it.
All right, great. So looking forward to talking about this. And I'm going to start off with just a short scenario to just try and bring this to life. I guess one of the questions that always goes in the back of my mind every year when I think about the role that we play on M&A is like, how do you make this team pay for itself? It's definitely not a non-standard capability to have in an HR function traditionally, to have people focused on thinking about M&A and about the M&A process. But I want to give you a simple illustration of how you can add enough value that effectively whatever resources you're throwing at this is probably going to end up subsidizing itself. So here's the scenario. Most HR practitioners are very used to being part of talent reviews. In this scenario, you're sitting down with the corporate development function in finance, and you're sitting down with a leader, and you're having a talent review, but you're talking about the talent you just met at a management presentation, where you've gone to meet the leaders of a target company you're thinking about buying, and they've probably spent most of the day walking you through like a 400-page deck, explaining all aspects of their business at a high level. What's the strategy? What's the financials? What's the operating model? Who are the customers? What does the industry mean? And a load of operational things around the organization, the technology platforms, and so on and so forth. you're sitting there reviewing the outputs of that day and also having a conversation about your impressions about those leaders and thinking, if we want to buy this business, which of those leaders really impressed us and which of those leaders do we think could play a big role in helping us take this business to the next level as part of the acquisition? Now, the reality is you probably actually spent no more than an hour with each of those leaders in a group setting at this point. So you're kind of trying to evaluate talent in the equivalent of a corporate equivalent of a speed date. But, you know, strong opinions always quickly come up, and you find that at the end of this conversation, the CEO is someone that the team have some question marks about. You know, they did a good performance on the day, but they've got a slightly unorthodox CV. So the question mark is, do they have the depth of experience and the control of the leaders of the business to really play a big role going forward as part of your company? The person who came out on top, really, and with a strong brand, was the Chief Technology Officer. That person was seen as being the source of many of the innovations that happened to create these products that really powered that business over the last 5 years. And you know, you think, well, maybe this is someone we're going to have to think very carefully about how we tie them in, make sure that their employer shareholdings are turned into some sort of earn-out agreement that keeps that value creator, maybe a unique value creator, around for a period of time. Fast forward a month, the HR team have basically taken the outputs of that speed date assessment and said, okay, well, how do we get some more depth and clarity around what we think about the talent? And have brought in a vendor during the due diligence process, a confidential process, of course, to do an executive assessment on some of those leaders, including those two leaders that we just talked about, and also run a very limited 360. And you're debriefing on those results with the same group now, the corporate development leaders and the business leaders, and it's making a complete 180 on your assessment of the talent. So the CEO came out as being well respected, well liked by the team, driving a coherent culture, really clear about what the strategic value of the business was and how to drive growth. Whereas the Chief Technology Officer was definitely still seen as an innovator, but hadn't really been able to successfully implement any of their innovations in the last 5 years, and was maybe moving towards the exit anyway. So, you know, within a month's work, you've been able to redirect potentially a few $1 million worth of incentives that you'd have to lay out over the next couple of years, from potentially the wrong person to potentially the right person, maybe even reduce the total size of incentives that you were going to spend to keep some critical talent in place, and, you know, potentially save the company a couple of $1 million of opportunity cost, and have a lot of time trying to unwind what could have been a bad retention agreement down the road. Mm-hmm. So, you know, when you think about simple stories like that, you begin to see, right, there's a huge opportunity for HR to drive value in M&A. And I want to talk a little bit about some of that process and how you get to be in a position to have those types of discussions today. All right, so just to quickly introduce myself, I've been with American Express the last 10 years, and working in London and New York with a global reach across 30 countries. Currently the VP of HR for the international consumer business. If you have the American Express card in your pocket as a consumer outside the US, then colleagues of mine helped put it there. And I was leading M&A for HR in Amex for several years, and had done many projects as a Deloitte consultant. So 40 plus deals under my belt. You know, certainly had a lot of experiences, a lot of fun, and hopefully sharing some of those learnings today.
You've been on both sides.
Yeah, well, a lot of late nights, unfortunately. I'm going to jump in and sort of talk about three themes: how and when HR can play a role. We definitely see a lot of variety there. I'm going to talk about how you build that capability, the sorts of capabilities you're looking to build. Some of them are quite technical, some of them less so, and just bring some of simple points of view on how to manage the deal's stakeholders and how to really influence the outcome and get the HR function ready to do that. So let's jump into that first theme about the when and the how. So not every deal is the same. Like, opportunities for HR to create value really do depend on a number of factors. And, you know, I think the baseline is that HR has a role to play in every transaction, pretty much, and it's going to add value in terms of it's going to reduce risk factors in every deal. There's always questions to be asked about, let's say, the employment litigation history of a company. That even on a venture investment, which I've had some experience with, is worthwhile going and having a look at. If the face of the company has, you know, unresolved employee-related lawsuits hanging out there before you make an investment or want to buy a company. Those are not liabilities you want passing through to you when you buy that organization. But you can also play a much more strategic role. And one of the drivers for that is going to be what are the deal aims themselves. And they can really vary, and that's going to have a big implication on what HR's role can be. So just taking a look at some of the examples here on the page, the primary drivers for the deal may be that you're buying a very similar competitor, and really you're looking just to accelerate the number of the sheer number of customers you can reach instead of having to spend money to build those customers over a couple of years. HR's role is going to be about taking very similar organizations, removing the duplication, probably reducing the overall headcount to produce some savings, and also figuring out how do we bring maybe two slightly different cultures going at the same market together under a common set of norms. You know, that's kind of the classic acquisition scenario, right? I think more recently, what you've seen a lot of companies doing is using M&A as a way to accelerate innovation. So instead of thinking through how we're going to build this piece of technology, we'll just go and buy it instead. And that will mean going and buying a startup and maybe not even keeping the business model. You want the engineers, you want the technology, you may not want the leadership team, you may not want the sales team. So you'll be cherry picking capabilities out of an organization, and the role HR is going to play there is going to be about engaging and retaining a very specific subset of critical talent. And you'll need to figure out how we're going to bring those guys into the organization, what retention awards do we want to think through, and what cultural issues might exist there. The other variation that I think you see quite a lot now is in terms of buying for innovation is using acquisitions to basically bring new business models into your portfolio. And the nuance there is that when you're buying a new business model, you probably don't have anyone internally at a senior level that you really trust will know exactly how to run the nuts and bolts of that new business model. So talent in the acquired organization becomes very important. You need to know that those people can fit into your organizational culture, that they're motivated to want to stay for a few years, and that they can work within what might be a much larger organizational infrastructure than they're used to. So the HR role is slightly different. The problems you're solving are slightly different, but the role of HR again becomes central to getting value from that transaction. And this brings us on to that question around what's the focus in an M&A people agenda. Really, every part of HR is going to get involved in an acquisition. The employee experience is central. Anyone who's been through a transaction as someone who's part of an acquired company knows the feeling of, oh, well, we're being bought by this other organization that no one knows anything about. Clearly, this is going to mean change. What is this going to mean for me? Will my job remain the same? Will my leader remain the same? Is the ways of working going to change? Why are they even doing this? There's a huge amount of change management work to be done there. But then also you've got to think through some strategic questions around structure. How do the capabilities of the two organizations fit together? Is there duplication? Are there unique ways of working and practices that you need to preserve in the company you're acquiring in order to keep that business model functioning? And then you've got to think through everything that goes into the guts of running an HR service. So what's their HRIS system? How does it link up to payroll? How does it link up to finance? What is the cost of their technology platform? How do they even band and pay their employees? Are we going to bring those two systems together? Are they going to come on our performance management system? All those decisions need to be made. So you end up pulling in every part of HR into this conversation and maybe having conversations that the function hasn't had in many years about what works, what doesn't, how much variation in our systems and processes are we willing to tolerate in order to make a transaction worthwhile doing. You end up having a very broad conversation about what the future can be. The irony, of course, is that the M&A process itself is almost always the same. It's 4 stages. The first half is always done under the guise of confidentiality. There'll be signed non-disclosure agreements, and you'll be working through that first half of the process to really establish that, one, with the letter of intent, which is the first box on the left, that you're interested in buying that other company at all. The due diligence phase is really that first sort of interaction between the buyer and the seller. And that's where, through very limited opportunities to interact in reality, You try and figure out as much information as you can about the company's financials, the way it operates its business, how many employees it has, what the compensation and benefit structure is, who owns what shareholdings, and begin to form a thesis about, do we want to buy this company or not? Do we feel like we've got all the risks articulated? And you'll go through the negotiation process to actually sign a deal agreement if you feel like you want to go ahead and you feel you can make this deal work.
Mm-hmm.
Once you get that deal signed and the deal goes public, then you've got the fun of preparing to figure out how to integrate that organization into your business. If it's going to be a standalone island away from the rest of your business, you've probably got relatively limited amounts of work to do. But if you're going to actually bring them into every process that you have, then you've got a cross-functional team to mobilize and a big change project on your hands to really digest that business into your systems and processes, maybe over 180 days, maybe over a year, depending on the complexity of the work that you're doing.
David, in your experience, what is the best stage for HR to come into the conversation of the M&A process?
It's a great question. For me, the biggest opportunity to make impact is prior to the deal being signed and made public. It's really in that letter of intent and diligence phase you've got the opportunity to influence the foundations of a deal and people strategy. If you think about that story that I started off with, that conversation around talent was happening very, very early in the diligence phase. And the assumptions we were having to make based on very limited information about the key people we needed to operate a business that, in that scenario, was a different business model, something that wasn't well understood, are pretty big. You may be spending a couple of $1 million to retain 3 or 4 people. Having HR around the table, having HR's comfort with bringing in an external vendor to run some executive assessments and really enrich the data around that conversation was key to not misallocating, a large amount of money.
Yeah, is that common given your experience and conversations with your peers? Is that the norm?
I think it's pushing on the edge of what's possible, and there's 2 reasons for that. I think assessing executives during due diligence is something that they have to sign up for as part of the negotiation process. If you're in a competitive bid process where there's multiple buyers trying to buy the asset, it's probably not going to happen. But if it's an exclusive process between the 2 companies and there's a good relationship being developed, it's entirely possible. And, it's going to add a huge amount of value. The other conversation that's clearly going to happen is about integration strategy. You don't start thinking about integration at the pre-closing and post-closing integration phase. There's actually a financial model being built in due diligence about what the integration costs are going to be. And, you have to contribute to that conversation as an HR function. You have to say, well, do we think that this 200-person technology company who work in a methodology that the corporation that's buying it don't use, that have performance management systems that we would never implement, but drive the value and drive the innovation capability of this business? Like, do we want to change those? There has to be a debate about that up front, and that has to be priced in. It may be the difference between allowing that business to keep doing what it does best. If you're looking for it to keep producing new and fresh ideas, you'd have to make those decisions correctly. Most of those discussions are being had early on. You want to be able to communicate big messages like that around, we're not planning to change any of your systems and processes, to employees from the beginning, if you've got the opportunity to do that, because that's going to calm them all down, make them feel like they want to stay, make them feel like their way of working and their contribution is valued. And it will have a huge dividend in terms of engaging those people down the road.
Yeah, which is normally something we end up trying to problem solve after when it's too late. Not too late, but more difficult.
There are limits. You've really got to learn about what information is available, and you have to. There are always going to be assumptions that you're making when you're during due diligence. You certainly don't have full information or a clear view into the guts of the organization. But the more you can make some good informed assumptions, the better off you're going to be able to protect some value.
Great. I'll let you jump back in.
So that's really the key message there. I think that as we think about the value that HR can add, trying to build a capability that allows you to play in that due diligence space with the deal professionals is an opportunity to really, one, not only create financial impact, but also add strategic value in the way that I think HR really wants to on transactions consistently. Let's talk about building an M&A capability that can help you do that then briefly. So this is a quote that I get from HR practitioners a lot when talking about transactions. They often say this is a once in a career experience. It is unusual for most people who work in HR to see more than one deal at a time, unless they're working for a very large corporation. And I think the challenge that creates is that there are some unique features to the way that transactions work, and that sort of received wisdom and that knowledge of the uniqueness of the environment can get lost in the process. There's three factors really that make for a different operating environment when you're working on a deal. The first one is that no deal is the same. Some of this is about the strategic variations that you see in why you're doing a deal that we talked about a little earlier. But the other one is just that every company you buy is slightly different, even if it's in the same industry. There's a hopefully fairly straightforward implication of difference between buying a Japanese startup and buying a US startup if you're a US company. The Japanese startup, there's just a language barrier for one. There's going to be huge cultural differences between the Japanese company and the American company. You may feel like you've got a playbook for buying smaller startup technology-based companies, but when you've got this differential footprint, you've got a difference in language, you've got a difference in culture, you've got to approach the transaction in a different way, and you've got to be sensitive to that. The other factor that you've got to bear in mind is the process is incredibly fast-moving. Some of the key big strategic decisions we talked about around, do we integrate the business or not into our processes and systems? Who are we going to retain from the senior management team? A lot of those decisions are being made within 6 to 8 weeks, start to finish, during the due diligence phase. That means there's going to be very limited data. That means there's going to be not necessarily a huge amount of time to sit back and think this over. You're going to have to work quickly and fast to make the best decision you can in the context, and that's not something I think is normal. When you think about recruitment, when you think about planning organizational designs or HRIS changes, moving at that pace is not something that many organizations are used to at all. Mm-hmm. And then the third factor, of course, is that it's a negotiation. And what a negotiation process means is that usually data is limited. There's a level of trade-off being made in the sense of, some of the issues that as an HR practitioner you feel are very important may just not get the attention that they need in the short term. There's a question of how are we going to find a path to get this deal done once we're committed to wanting to make it happen. And you often get asked the question during an M&A process of, how does this affect the price of the transaction? If it doesn't, then maybe it's a secondary issue. Does it affect the way we're negotiating the sale agreement? If the answer to that is also no, then it's probably an issue for post-merger integration, and it's other stakeholders worrying about it. It's probably not the deal team. So what that can mean is that the BAU assumptions around we want to preserve the well-being and the engagement of the employees are very, very important to the people who are going to inherit the business once it's been bought, but are less of an immediate concern to those trying to negotiate the transaction itself. So HR's kind of got to pivot its way of thinking to say, well, how do I appeal to both audiences and find my feet in that slightly different commercial dynamic?
Interesting. Yeah. Any tips on, I'm sure you probably learned the hard way in many of those times, or any tips around how to gain the buy-in from both sides and manage both sets of stakeholders? Things to do, things not to do?
Well, there's definitely some data-driven opportunities to work through. Like, I think you've just got to pick. There are certain times to bring up certain issues and certain times to not. We found that focusing on talent and culture as it relates to the integration of senior management before a deal is closed is definitely a lever that everyone can relate to.
Okay.
It's an item where you're going to be spending a huge amount of money potentially to convert senior management shareholdings into retentive agreements down the road. And you don't want to be wasting money there. You want to make sure that you've got a sense of, one, these people are a cultural fit. Two, you've got a clear idea what the role for them in the future is going to be, at least for the first 12 months. And you want to feel like you understand what the role is that these people are going to be playing. And that gives you a great lever to talk about, well, okay, what is the vision for this business going forward? What are the objectives for these leaders going to be in terms of how do they have to run? What are we hoping they can achieve with the business over the next 2 years? And that's a conversation that often requires a bit of effort. in order to get moving. But once you do get a sense of, okay, here are what we think their objectives for the first 18 months might be, here are the key capabilities we need them to deliver, here's the financial plan at a high level we think is behind that, you then begin to be able to say, well, look, one, can that person do that job? What do we know about them? Do we have confidence that they can do it? How long does that mean we need to retain them for? And what implications does that have for how their organization needs to be able to function? And is integrating them into our standard processes going to make sense in that context? And it gives us a great lever to talk about strategy. You're very rarely going to get the opportunity to think about significant numbers of people below maybe the top 15 or 20 before a deal is signed. But once you get through and make a public announcement, really the doors open wide, and you can start thinking very carefully about how we're going to engage the whole employee population and start working through some the classic sort of change management toolkit that HR does so well, including thinking about an employee survey, thinking about maybe some cultural assessment work, those types of things that I think people are very passionate about and find can add a lot of value down the road.
Fantastic. All right.
So let's talk about capabilities quickly. I think everyone's familiar with this idea of playbooks and checklists. If you spend a lot of time with M&A consultants, they always have these in the bag and they're ready to go, and they're quite happy to support corporations in building them. And we've certainly benefited at American Express from doing so, not just within HR, but as a sort of coordinated corporate function approach. We went through a phase maybe 4 or 5 years ago of every corporate function, finance, technology, human resources, building their playbook together around a common set of integration assumptions, which gave everyone a default approach and a set of, clearly linked work streams to deliver sort of within 100 days a well-performed integration. The checklists kind of fall out of that playbook. And the other thing I'd say has been a huge benefit for us too is good governance. This isn't something that I think that's very often talked about, but having really clear decision makers about go, no go for the transaction and about go, no go for the integration strategy has been extremely helpful in accelerating our ability to get deals done, to learn lessons over time and improve our performance when performing M&A. The structure of that committee was basically we took executive committee members reporting to the CEO who were leading all the control functions, the head of corporate development, and we put them on a governance committee that met every couple of weeks and gave them stage gates in every transaction process where they'd review the progress and give feedback, and then have the ability to say go, no go on any deal on behalf of the CEO. Really helpful, certainly clarified stakeholder management, certainly clarified and built confidence across the business about the way the M&A process was being run, and really sped up our ability to say yes.
That was what I was thinking the entire time we were saying it. I was like, the speed of decision making must have been a huge factor in that as well.
Yeah, and it also allowed us to take more risks because you didn't have to explain all the precedents every time. It was like, here's what we learned, and it was like, yes, I don't want you to do what we did on this deal. I want you to do what we did on this deal. And the common language had been developed around what the strategy was. I think what goes along with that, though, is sort of a willingness to innovate and building some innovation muscle within your HR deal team, but within HR as a whole has become a big part of making deals happen. And we found that whether it's a big transaction where you're taking a whole business unit and doing something meaningful to it, or you're adding in a capability to a business unit, you'll find that the playbooks are very powerful in terms of giving everyone a sense of this is what we would normally do, but you're often in a position where you're having to make an alternate plan. So as an owner of a COE in the past, I can say to you very comfortably that no one who owns a COE, who owns like the HRIS system or the performance management system or the compensation rules, wants to have to make variations to their global systems. Already complex. I think that at my last time accounting, American Express was offering 900 separate benefits across the world to its employees. You don't want to add in another 50.
Yes.
Because of some transaction. But you will find that the ability of HR to control exactly how things get implemented is not always going to be 100% there. One scenario I can talk about is that a medium-sized transaction, let's say 700 or 800 people, maybe in 5 or 6 countries, could have been integrated into all of American Express's infrastructure. I don't think that scenario worked because there was some nuance in the way that the financial accounting for this business that we were potentially going to buy worked and couldn't be replicated in our own finance systems. What you end up with then is everyone saying, look, it's actually not worth integrating at all. Let's let that business be standalone for a period of time, which creates complexity for everyone, but actually allowed us to gain the value of doing the transaction at all. So that's where the alternate plans and that openness to difference is really important. Simple rules for decision making are also something I think are really powerful, and I'll talk about those in a little bit more in a second. And obviously having a really clear exception process among your governance of, okay, if we are going to think about doing something differently, how are we going to get that decision made? Very helpful to keeping that decision making moving at the right pace. So let's talk about simple rules for decision making for a second. If you go back to that story I began with, as the HR leader, you're sitting around the table often with 2 really influential stakeholders in the deal process. One is corporate development, the other is the owner of the acquisition going forward. They have 2 very different mindsets. The corporate development leader really lives by this mantra of the best deal teams don't do bad deals. You know, this is all about risk aversion. You know, deal professionals probably assume that of every 10 opportunities they look at, they may complete 1 or 2 transactions. So they're expecting most deals not to go through, and they're spending a lot of their time looking for risk. Is there a financial problem that we can't pass back to the seller or to the buyer and say this is a liability that you have to pay for out of the sale price? Or they're looking for a lack of strategic fit. The acquisition owner, on the other hand, is usually the person who's come up with the idea of doing this deal, is excited about the potential for the business, and wants to see this deal made successful, and they're looking for anything that's going to get in the way of the business being successful once it's actually been integrated into the acquiring company. So 2 very different ways of looking at the world, and somehow you've got to balance that off in trying to be flexible and responsive, but focused on how you pick the right priorities. So 4 things that we've started asking ourselves over the years, and I've certainly come to use as a bit of as a fallback position when confronted with something new and different, are these 4 simple rules. So I'll often ask myself, when I'm given an opportunity to either do something unorthodox with integrating a company into our systems and processes in HR, or confronted with a liability or a set of policies and procedures or commitments to employees that I've never seen, we often ask ourselves, like, does the situation advance any of these 4 goals by leaving it the same or changing it? Which way do we need to go to meet these 4 goals? The first one is managing compliance and value destruction risk. Obviously, American Express is a financial services company. Compliance is a big point for us. But value destruction also basically can mean simply taking on financial liabilities related to pensions, related to employees that we don't want to be able to inherit for the long term. So we'll ask that question. Does this either improve our ability to manage that risk or reduce it? The second question that we'll always ask is, if we choose to integrate or not integrate this business, retain this employee or not retain this employee, bring in our performance management system or keep their performance management system, will that protect the value employees bring to the company being acquired? So employees have ways of working. They may just be unique talents. They may have domain expertise that we don't have. If we have to protect that, we have to think holistically about what is the employee experience that is allowing that person to deliver value in the way that they do today. That may not mean coming onto our compensation. That may not mean being part of our annual planning cycle in terms of the way that they develop products and services. We have to think very carefully about that, and that may mean breaking some of the rules about the way we operate as a company day to day in our normal business. That leads on to the next point about how do we shape the employee experience. Obviously, any major change that people go through, the change curve immediately kicks in. We spend a lot of time thinking about when we submit a budget for integration, there'll always be a section on change management. There'll always be some spending that we think we need to do to shape the employee experience in a positive way, to make sure they're clear on who their boss is going to be, what their benefits are going to be going forward, and actually do some concerted employee listening in the first month, in the first 6 months, around how do the employees perceive their experience of being part of American Express going forward. And the more we've done that, actually, the more we've learned about what we can do to make a difference early on in that experience. And that's again balanced off with this idea of you've got to deliver change as cost efficiently as possible. So how do we make sure that the impacts that we're trying to achieve with the tools that we want to spend money on delivering, we know they're going to work. We feel like we've built a business case for them, and that we're not spending money we don't need to be in order to make it as easy as possible for this deal to be value accretive within 18 to 24 months. So I don't know if you've got any questions on that, Chris, but those
questions on LinkedIn. So a few people asked questions on LinkedIn if you want to jump in for a second. So Dr. Santino Ruff asked, what are the top 3 priorities on the strategic agenda of the CHRO of yourself and the CEO whilst doing the due diligence? What are the priorities?
From a people point of view, the first priority really is to make sure that you've got an absolutely crystal clear view of all the liabilities. So this goes back to this idea of value destruction risk. You're looking to understand shareholdings and making sure that you've got a really good grip on how the company is controlled, because usually some of the absolutely critical talent are going to have share ownership, and to retain and engage those talent, you're going to have to think very carefully about what happens when the shares change hands. At the end of the day, what the deal is if it's a share acquisition where you're buying the company, every shareholder is going to get paid out the value of their shares at a very significant premium. So what you don't want to happen is the most important people of the company to suddenly have enough money in their pockets to be able to go away and go to the beach and not have to stay and work with you on the business for another couple of years.
I can imagine that happens more often than we think.
Well, you've got to make sure that you've found a mechanism that they're willing to agree to, where you're actually going to convert and create upside for them down the road by sticking around for a period of time. Mm-hmm. And that becomes a very big focus of time and attention. So that's number one. Number 2, I'd say, is just making sure you've got a really good grip on what are the capabilities of the business that make this business unique, and what does our deal strategy require us to keep functioning. If you're buying a technology platform, and that's really the asset that you're buying when you buy the company, you're not worried about the sales teams. You're not worried about any of their management culture. You just want to retain the engineers. You want to buy the technology asset, and then you get it integrated into your business. So that simplifies your focus. But if you're buying a very, very large company that's a direct competitor, and you want to keep 90% of the workforce, particularly the sales teams, engaged and moving forward, you've got to think very, very carefully about cultural considerations and so on and so forth. So I think your priorities can change depending on the deal.
Mm-hmm. What about from the CEO's perspective? What are you seeing that their priorities are when you're having those conversations?
For them, I'd say the number one thing that they're worried about is talent. Who's going to run the business? How quickly can we get ourselves refocused back on the customer? Integration can be a very big and complicated and time-consuming process. But really what you're doing is integrating the back offices. And it's also usually got a relatively large price tag on it, which is a drag on the P&L in reality for a period of time. And I think good CEOs have a clear view of, okay, well, I understand what I want to achieve out of integrating a business, and whether it's the right move or not. And do I feel the price tag for that integration is going to be manageable against the strategy we're trying to deliver? So I think that's very important. Tie that up with the idea of let's make sure we got the right people on the bus still, and we understand exactly what our objectives are for the next 2 years and how we're going to go about bringing those people into my management team, my ways of working as a leader. Those are great questions that a CEO should be asking, because if you get that right and you've got a team, you've acquired a management team that are excited to be there, incentivized to be there in terms of the self-interest and opportunity they have going forward, and are ready to deliver on clear goals, then you're going to be able to really accelerate your pathway towards achieving the deal business case.
Fantastic. Someone just send me a personal LinkedIn message with a question. If you know what we're asking. They said no matter what, the first one was great presentation so far, and they said no matter how well you plan, there are some unseen corners, during the M&A. How do you make sure that you stay agile during the process?
Well, I think one of the challenges of running a deal is there are always surprises. When I was running the deal team for HR at American Express, we used to my door would be open from like 5 o'clock onwards, because particularly as we got closer and closer to closing an integration and making that, cutting the employees over into our systems, there would always be problems coming every day. There'd be surprises. Something hadn't quite happened the way we expected, or some new information had come to light. And you just learn to keep calm and carry on, to use that British phrase, and try and keep everything in perspective. There's always going to be problems. If the information is imperfect, you're going to end up with an imperfect execution. So you had to work as hard as possible to try and make sure that the information you had was as strong as it could be. And that involved really great project management. That involved making sure that the deal team that you stand up when you're integrating is made up equally of people from the acquired company as it is from the acquirer, and that you're working very, very hard to make sure you've got a clear view of exactly what it is you're trying to deliver and how these dependencies interact. With practice, you generally begin to weed out most of the problems, and you just learn by doing. Is the bottom line. The opportunities for change in your deal process absolutely come from mistakes you've made 3 deals before.
Interesting. Okay. So that's the important thing is to get it right from the beginning. Then it's probably going to limit the amount of change and pivoting that you're going to have to do throughout the process.
Yeah, exactly.
Perfect. You want to jump back into the presentation? Yeah,
sure. Okay. Right. So this is just the last few words on managing the deal stakeholders and influencing the outcome. So, again, going back to this idea that for most HR practitioners, transactions are maybe unique experiences. You're dealing with a lot of people in the process where that is truly the opposite of the case. There's a huge industry around M&A out there, and you'll find that corporate development leaders, M&A lawyers, and the investment bankers, will have done easily 100 to 200 transactions over the course of their career if they're at any level of seniority. And for them, there's a set of assumptions, a shorthand about how information and issues link together and impact the sale price, impact the structure of the deal agreement, or what they think a good or bad integration looks like, and the success factors for achieving the business case of an M&A are that they almost take for granted. And being able to influence those guys means trying to meet them where they are, in my experience. And as you begin to develop your HR functions familiarity with some of those levers, it's helpful just to have a sense of what the questions are that these guys are going to ask. And this is really at the most, the highest possible level, because I didn't want to crowd the slide, but, corporate development really is just interested in risk. They want to understand, what does the data tell us are the financial risks and the execution risks that are inherent in the information that's presented in the data room. So HR is being asked a great deal to do something it doesn't get asked to do a huge amount, which is quantify, first and foremost, what is the financial impact of this difference between their benefits and our benefits going to be. And if you've got 4 to 6 weeks to take benefits arrangements and compensation arrangements from across 2 companies, maybe in multiple markets, and analyze and compare them, you've got to find a way to do that in an efficient and constructive way. The investment bankers are going to be asking questions about talent and share ownership. General counsel is going to be asking about the sale agreements. What does the treatment of this employment liability mean for how we're going to write a technical part of the agreement? Is a question that I don't think many HR people are used to being asked, but it's something that over time we certainly get a lot more comfortable with. And finding the right support and advice through that process is really, really, really helpful. The acquired management and the acquiring management basically have different versions of the same question, which is, what's the future going to be like? Who's the right person to run this company in your view? What should our future organization structure look like, and what does that mean for me going forward? Those are more classic talent questions. I think we're happier to deal with on a day-to-day basis, I think, as an HR function. But the challenge here is about expectation management. is can you give good advice about when is the right time to be dealing with these questions and what levers you actually have to pull at different points in the process. Some of these things can't be resolved until the deal is done and you've got access to the company as a whole and all its information, and you can collaborate on these issues. Other things can be dealt with immediately and need to be dealt with before a deal is signed. So you've just got to be ready to say, look, let's chunk the work into these sections. Here's the pieces we can deal with now. Here are the problems we can solve down the road. Are you comfortable with that? And the simplest advice I could give really about managing some of those expectations and building that level of influence with corporate development is to take a model like this that we've used at American Express for a long time, where you have basically a small PMO team that's working as a partner to corporate development, probably just the same as technology, finance, your security teams, and allow those guys to develop a long-term relationship with corporate development on all these multiple transactions, learn to speak the language, learn to influence, and use them as a layer that integrates all of your expertise from your HR function into the deal process in an efficient way. It's the M&A PMO for HR that's going to write your playbook in collaboration with your functional teams that are going to streamline a huge amount of the interactions that need to happen between corporate development and the corporate functions to get a deal done, and hopefully make sure that on deals that don't go ahead, your HR functions aren't unnecessarily distracted. But on deals that do go ahead, your HR functional teams really are well prepared, have a clear sense of what's going on, and have had their voice included in the process in terms of what the execution plan is going to be.
Mm-hmm. That's a really good overview, by the way. That I know a lot of people are going to be screenshotting right now. That slide.
That's great. So the only other thing I just want to touch on briefly before I wrap up is this question of, can you deploy HR's tools at speed to support deals? If you think about these 7 or 8 issues on the slide, none of them are new to human resources. We do this type of work all the time. It ranges from the very quote-unquote strategic to the very deep operational. But the question is, can you do analysis? Can you tailor the surveys you'd use to do a ways of working survey, for example, to fit the deal environment? And can you make it simple enough and fast enough to deliver that it's going to be able to add value in a timely way? So just to talk through a couple of simple examples, let's talk about structure and capabilities fit. So if you think about 2 organizational structures and bringing them together, you don't have time to go and do a series of workshops to develop the point of arrival structure. You actually have to take that work and chunk it down into stages. So particularly on a very big global M&A, you're not going to be able to get from having 2 separate companies to having a well-defined single organizational structure that will stand up for another 20 months or 3 years in 3 to 6 months. The reality is you're probably going to have to just take one organization that you're buying, figure out how you're going to, as an interim step, plug it in to your existing organization and put in some ways of working and governance that allows you to control that business to some degree for maybe the first 100, 200 days after close. That gives you the time to then say, okay, where do we want this organization to go over the long term? It gives you the time to learn about the talent, to learn about how the operating model really works, and theorize about, okay, what do we think this combined organization should look like going forward, and where are the synergies really going to get realized? So having that little playbook about how do we do an interim organizational design, very important. When we think about the talent who drive the business model, again, going back to that first story that I told, knowing that you can pull off an executive assessment and 360 review of maybe 4 or 6 people in the target organization inside a month in a confidential environment is a playbook you have to know you can execute if you're going to go and try and do it. So making sure you've got the right vendor, knowing what the objectives are that you want to achieve in that process, that's a slightly different form of recruitment than maybe you would do in a BAU environment. If you can start building those little add-ons to your BAU toolkit for all these great strategic initiatives, you're going to be able to add a huge amount of value to the M&A process and really make sure that you've got the opportunity to influence and nudge those transactions forward in a way that's going to make them much more likely to be successful.
Fantastic. I love it, though. Is that the last? Oh, we still got more?
Yeah, please. So just to summarize, really, HR can play a huge role in capturing value. You building repeatable process and innovation muscle is really key to managing that and the complexity. Make sure you know the concerns of your partners in the deal process, and figuring out how to make your existing tools more agile to deploy is really going to give you the opportunity to add value to the process. So with that, I'll hand back to you, Chris.
Thank you so much. Let me bring us back to normal. There we go. I appreciate that was a lot of information there to take in. I'm gonna have to rewatch it myself 3 or 4 times. I have so many questions. I've got a lot of questions that people are messaging me on LinkedIn. If you don't mind, I'll jump into those.
Yeah.
One of the questions that came up a few times was, how do you maintain and manage the status quo whilst managing the merger at the same time, in terms of energy resources allocated to managing day-to-day operations, projects that are ongoing already, and dealing with the M&A at the same time? Like, how do you manage resources, time?
I found that you've really got to evaluate the size of the deal itself. If the deal is affecting the whole business unit that you're running as a chief people officer, then you're probably going to be stopping pretty much everything else you're doing, except the absolutely essential annual processes to make sure that this thing gets delivered in the right way. But if you're bringing in a few hundred people into a team in one country as part of a 10,000 person organization, if you have a dedicated team to manage the process, you're probably going to have the capacity to make it work. And it becomes a special project that the people in that country manage. You'll bring in a few consultants to help expand your capability. And it just becomes the focus of that subgroup of your organization. So it really varies, but I've found that standing up the right consulting support, having a dedicated team within your own organization, it just creates capacity. And people are excited to get involved. It's not a chore. They're like, oh, this is going to be something really great to talk about on my CV. So people lean in and really hope to learn from the experience and give extra time in their day and their commitment to make it happen.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it really, as you said, it really depends on the circumstances, size of the deal. Completely makes sense.
It can stop everything you're doing if it's big enough.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
Is at that point, is it then also about managing expectations to other stakeholders in the business that perhaps be demanding, well, they're going to be affected directly by this as well? Is that a big part of it? Making sure that you keep those communication lines open and manage expectations. Say, look, this is what we're doing. This is the focus right now.
Yeah. If the couple of times I've been through an experience where you're moving thousands of people, like maybe 10 or 20,000 people in or out of the business as part of a transaction process, you know that that's coming for 6 months in advance. And you've got the opportunity to sit down with all the owners of your centers of excellence and so on and brief them and make sure they're fully engaged with what's going on. And frankly, you're going to have an execution budget that allows you to supplement their teams to make this work happen. And it is going to be one of the 2 or 3 biggest things that you're doing as an HR organization across the whole company that year. So in that scenario, you've got senior management's attention. They're like, okay, we want this to happen. The executive team of the company want this to happen. We're all in, and you'll see work being reprioritized to make that happen. And in that scenario, like, the capacity of the organization expands and gets redirected to make sure the deal is possible. But you don't want to be surprising people with it, and that's one of the biggest risks of really not being involved in the diligence process. When corporate development is disconnected from the rest of the organization, I've heard stories of people being given a phone call 3 days before something needs to happen in 10 countries and told, oh, by the way, we've just found out that who you are and you're the right person to deal with this problem. Can you help us come up with a solution this week? To a problem that needs 3 months of work.
Yeah, wow. On that point, what are the sort of common mistakes do you see most companies make, or that we can avoid? But common avoidable mistakes that people are making, companies are making.
I think it's trying to execute something that you don't have a joined up plan across the business for. I think at the end of the day, like, you've got to pick 1 or 2 things you think are really important about making that transaction work going forward, and then focus on delivering those. It'd be very easy to try and boil the ocean. But if your key thing is, we think there's 50 people who are really driving the value of this business, make sure you retain them and spend the money on doing that, and make your organization design decisions around making them comfortable. Don't try and put too many contradictory decisions in around change. The organization design decision about do we integrate the business or do we leave it separate is also an area where I think you get different political pressures going on around, well, we'd like to bring them into our compliance systems quickly versus not bringing them into our HR systems or our finance systems. Generally, I find the back office is very deeply integrated through HR, through your employee system of record, access to technology systems all flows through that. So HR can end up getting stuck in a position where you're trying to keep everyone happy and give people access to this system, be on that system, but not on this system. And you end up creating this huge mess of complexity. Whereas you could just say, look, let's just leave them separate for now. Let's understand what we think where they need to be in a year's time, and we can spend the money to bring them in the right way with a bit of time. You can't rush integration, really. You probably spend money you don't need to spend by doing that.
What about your own team? Because for many, that maybe it'd be their first time going through an M&A. What kind of training and support do you provide your own HR team that have never been in this position before? They're new on this journey. You know, yourself, you've been through a few at that point. Well, what does that look like?
Well, in the past, I've invested in running like a 1 or 2 day workshop, sort of preparing people when time was quiet. And that certainly helped get your key practitioners who are going to be making a lot of decisions and the benefits and the compensation team clear. But we found that the best way to really increase the efficiency of the business of HR in dealing with these things is to put someone on point in every function of HR. That really helped us to get them comfortable, develop a good relationship with them, and then also have them go through 2-3 transactions and go through that learning process. But the playbook is the best place to start. If you can hand someone a to-do list and say, let's talk through this and understand your point of view on what you think needs to get done and why, and have that debate with them, they're going to feel so much more confident because they've really got an opportunity to say, right, here's the 20 things that need to get done and this is the order in which they need to happen. I kind of understand what the issues are, and they can start just picking holes in it, which is, you know, what you want them to be ready to do is bring their expertise to the table and start just asking great questions. Because every deal is slightly different, and if you've got that openness to say there is no one answer, you tell me what you think needs to happen and why, you can negotiate with them through the process and get them into a place where they're comfortable and ready to implement and change.
And there's no other way of doing that than one-on-one. So that's quite a lengthy process, I'm assuming, to make all that happen.
Yeah, that's why you end up spending a lot of time on it, because you're trying to introduce a lot of change in a short period of time, and you've got a lot of people to corral.
Yeah, no, the reason I mentioned that, I know it's obvious, but a lot of people are looking for that quick fix, but there isn't one. There's a lot of time.
Well, normally it comes down to the individual transaction, because every situation is slightly nuanced.
Yeah. Well, look, I'm conscious of time. I know it's like we're going to do a 20-minute, half an hour. Here we are, an hour later. But thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time to join us, and everyone else on LinkedIn for tuning in. Before we wrap up, with just sort of one parting piece of advice you'd give to everyone, what would that be? And also, where's the best place for everyone to connect with you if they want to reach out to you personally, connect offline?
They can find me on LinkedIn. I think my one big piece of advice is, if you're going through the M&A journey, is get connected with someone who's been through it before. I had the opportunity to spend time with some people who'd done many, many deals at Cisco and other companies when I was going up the learning curve. And it was just so helpful because they shortcutted so many of the learnings that I needed to make.
Yeah.
And, there's a huge community of practitioners in HR out there in the US and Europe. And I find they're all just love talking about this topic. So you'll find people wanting to mentor you all over the place.
Exactly. They want to vent and they want to vent probably at the same time. The amount of people, it's funny, David, that HR leaders that contact me asking them to put them in touch with someone. I'm like, just reach out. And they're like, oh, maybe they won't reply, or I'm like, just trust me. There's no difference between me reaching out to them and you doing that. So, it's such a small, it's a very important, great piece of advice, reaching out to others that have been there, done it, lived it, breathed it, powered the fires. There's nothing better to be able to do.
That's the value of doing network, right? Is that we've got easy access to a whole bunch of people who've got this.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, look, thanks so much, David. I appreciate you joining us, and for everyone listening, appreciate you joining again. We'll back at the same time tomorrow. As always, we're here daily for you during this as well. If you're new to the show, please like, comment, share. Definitely, if you're on LinkedIn, tagging some colleagues in the HR team or leaders that you feel would gain value from the session and all of David's great experience. Apart from that, Enjoy the rest of your day, David, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Okay.
Well, thanks very much, Chris. Take care.
See ya. Bye.
Bye-bye.